Alright, this is a video on converting fractions. So this involves a few different topics. First of all, fractions to decimals. How do you turn a fraction into a decimal? Well, you might just know this is 0.5, but how do you actually turn a fraction into a decimal if you don't know what it is? Well, you do 1 divided by 2, because this line means divide. 1 divided by 2. Now this won't work, but it will work if you make it 1.0, which is the same as 1, or 1.00 if you need to. So I can do this bus stop. How many 2's in 1? 0, carried with 1. Line up the decimal point. How many 2's in 10? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 is 5. Because 1/2 equals 0.5. So you can turn any fraction into a decimal by dividing it. Top divided by bottom. Let's do another one. You might know what 1/4 is. You won't know what every fraction is as a decimal though. Maybe you know what 1/4 is, maybe you don't. Let's divide it. 1 divided by 4. It's unusual to have the small number inside the bus stop, isn't it? That's quite unusual, but that's what we're doing when we do 1 divided by 2. 1.0 or 1.00 will make it work. How many 4's in 1? 0, carried a 1. How many 4's in 10? 2, carry a remainder 2. How many 4's in 20 is 5? It's 0.25. This is great really, I think, because you can turn any fraction into a decimal by dividing it. And you can get very quick on these bus stops with practice. Quick and accurate. Let's do one that you won't probably know, like 7/8. If you don't know what 7/8 is as a decimal, you do top divided by bottom. 7 divided by 8. Let's put 0.0 on. You don't know how many zeros you're going to need. You don't know them. Start with 1. How many 8's in 7? 8's too big to fit in 7, so 0, 0, carried a 7. How many 8's in 70? I'll sing my 8's. 8 and 16, 24 and 32, 40, 48 and 56, and 64. I can't get any more. 64 was 8. I counted up to 64, but that says 70, so there's a remainder of 6. I'm going to need another 0 to bring over the remainder 6. How many 8's in 60? 8 and 16, 24 and 32, 40, 48 and 56. I can fit 7 in 56, but that's 60, so there's 4 remaining. So I need another 0. How many 8's in 40? 8 and 16, 24 and 32, 40, it's 5. This is not an easy fraction to turn into a decimal. Well, it's easy when you know what you're doing. But it's 0.875. Now, most people don't know their eighths as decimals. But you can easily find it out, or quite easily find it out if you're practiced at the bus stop, by doing 7 divided by 8. So that's how you can convert any fraction to a decimal. There's a few that don't work very well, in a way, like 1/3. What is this as a decimal? It's actually best as a fraction 1/3, because when you do 1 divided by 3, it's one of these ones. You might know what's going to happen. Let's put 1.0. I often put 1.00. Like I say, you don't know how many zeros you're going to need, but you know 1 is the same as 1 point nothing, isn't it? Anyway, how many 3's in 1? 0, carried a 1. How many 3's in 10? 3, remainder 1. How many 3's in 10? Oh, 3. We need another 0 because it's remainder 1. How many 3's in 10? 3, remainder 1. How many 3's in 10? 3, remainder 1. And this is one of those numbers that goes on and on and on. It'll always be 3's as long as you go on. So we can say it's 0.33 recurring. We can say that the 3's will just keep going forever. So it's one of those numbers that might be better as a fraction. 0.33 recurring, we might say. A little sign there to say that it will just keep going. But you can divide, therefore, any fraction into a decimal, although some won't end. You'll just keep going forever, but most do end, and you get a good decimal number. So that's one type of converting fractions. Let's go on to another one, which is fractions and how they relate to whole numbers and mixed numbers. So you can have the fraction 1/8. That's when, you know this means 1 divided by 8, don't you, of course, because we just did that. This line means divide. This means you have one whole one and you divide it into 8 pieces. So those pieces are quite small. So there's one whole circle. It's not very neat, but I'll divide it into 8 pieces. And if you only had one of them, this bit here, that's what you've got. So you haven't got a whole one, you've just got a bit, you've just got 1/8, okay? So you can't really compare 1/8 to whole numbers because it's not a whole one, is it? It's just one little bit. But when you've got a few more eighths, you could. If you had, 5/8, that's not a whole one, is it? How many eighths do you need to have one whole one? How many eighths do you need to have one whole one? You need all the eighths. You need 8/8. Then you can say that equals one whole one. 8/8 is one whole one. If you did 8 divided by 8, it would be 1. If you divide the fraction, you would get 1. Okay? 8/8 is one whole one. Let's do 9/8. If you have 9/8, how does that compare to a whole number? Well, you've definitely got a whole one because you only need 8/8 to have a whole one. But we've got 9/8, so we've got one extra eighth left over, haven't we? So this is what we call fraction turned into a mixed number, because this number at the end here is a mixture of whole numbers and fractions. This first number is also called a top-heavy fraction because the top's heavier than the bottom. Top's bigger than the bottom. If we had 10/8, you need 8/8 to make a whole one. We've definitely got 8/8, 9, 10. We've got 2/8 left over. So it's 1 and 2/8, isn't it? Hope that makes sense. Let's jump up a little bit. Let's jump up to 16/8. What if you've got 16/8? Well, 8/8 is one whole, but we've got 16/8. So 8 and 16. We've actually got two whole ones. So that's how this top-heavy fraction actually becomes a whole number. If you had 17/8, which is one more eighth than the last question, you've still got two wholes because 16/8 makes two wholes, but one extra eighth left over. So this is fractions being converted to whole numbers and being converted to mixed numbers. Let's do a really high one, like 59/8. Because how you can do it with big numbers like this, you can sing your eights, see how many you will fit into 59. Don't go past 59. So look for an 8 and 16, 24 and 32, 40, 48 and 56. So I counted up to 56. That was 7 whole ones. But this is 59. 56 up to 59 is an extra 3/8 left over. So that's how you can convert a top-heavy fraction like this into a mixed number like this. So that was the relationship between fractions and whole numbers and mixed numbers. And the last thing to show you in this video is equivalent fractions. Some fractions are worth the same as other fractions. So there's fractions that are worth the same as a half. And how do you find them? By doing the same to the top as you do to the bottom. So for example, if you times the top by 2 and you times the bottom by 2, you'll get an equivalent fraction. 1 times 2 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4. So 2/4 is the same size as 1/2. You could times them by something else. Let's say we times the top by 3 and the bottom by 3. Then we'd get 3 and we'd get 6, because 3/6 is also the same as 1/2. So if you do the same to the bottom as you do to the top, you will get an equivalent fraction. That's the rule. You have to multiply the top and the bottom by the same number if you want something that's worth the same. There's loads of things that are worth a half. If you multiply the top by 5, you get 5. And if you multiply the bottom by 5, you get 10. 5/10 is also a half. What if you multiply the top by 100? 1 times 100 is 100. Then you must multiply the bottom by 100 as well. 2 times 100 is 200. So anytime you multiply the top and the bottom by the same number, you'll get what's called an equivalent fraction, which means it's worth the same. So this is worth the same as this. And actually everything on this page is worth a half, isn't it? They're all equivalent to a half, all these fractions. Another example, if you want an equivalent fraction to 2/5, you do the same to the bottom as you do to the top. Let's multiply them both by, whatever it is, 4. Let's multiply them both by 4, but it has to be the same number. 2 times 4 is 8, 5 times 4 is 20. So 8/20 is worth the same as 2/5. But sometimes you see a question where they've already put part of the second fraction in. So you might just see this and you have to fill in the gap. Okay? So then you just think, okay, well, I don't know what happens to the top. It's a mystery. It's empty. but you can see what's happened to the bottom. You can just sing your songs, basically, to find out what we multiplied 5 by. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35. We multiplied it by 7. So you just do what we've been saying in this part of the video. Do the same to the bottom as you do to the top. So you do 2 times 7 as well, which will be 14. So 14 has to go on the top. Any other number would make this not equivalent, would make this not work. If it was 13 35ths, it wouldn't be the same as 2/5. If it was 15 35ths, it wouldn't be the same. You have to multiply it by 7 if the bottom was multiplied by 7 to get an equivalent fraction. You don't have to draw these arrows, but you might see teachers sometimes drawing them just to remind you to do the same to the top as you do to the bottom. One last example on this. Let's say we've got 5/8 and we have to change it into 30 mysteries. So you think, well, I don't know what happened to the bottom, I can't tell, but I can look at the top. What happens to 5 to get to 30? 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. Times it by 6. So times the bottom by 6 as well. 8 times 6 is 48. Now 48 is the only number that can go on the bottom here. Anything else would be incorrect because you have to multiply the top and the bottom by the same number. We multiplied them both by 6. So that's equivalent fractions. So hopefully this video will have helped you out a lot with converting fractions. And I'll see you again in another video.